Let's talk about our Quattro Cinco stakes and the thing that's coming to wreck them. And that is Quattro, as I call it. We're talking about EIP 444. Anyways, this concept that I'm going to talk to you guys about, it has a lot to do with eHex and the future of it. There's going to be a few video clips. Some of them are by really boring crypto nerds like myself, so you may have trouble sitting through it. So if you have something to do and you just want to listen to this, that's probably a great idea. This will be one of my lengthy rambling videos. Anyways, I'm not even really sure where to start. I mean, I wrote out so many notes of things I want to say. I mean, so as a crypto nerd, as somebody who's a big fan of ETH, in the winter here, it's cold. I look at some of the Ethereum improvement protocols that get thrown out there. Most of them never turn out to anything. There was the EIP 1559 that, did the fee burning and stuff like that. And this is how Ethereum improves itself. People can come forward with some code and some ideas, goes into a draft stage, and then it moves on. And this is how they constantly improve things. Now, most of these improvements, overall seem to do a lot of benefit. The movement to staking, the ETH.2, merge with the beacon chain, all great stuff. We're on to scalability. And, there was one that I was aware of, but didn't pay much mind to it. I never thought it would go anywhere. And that is the EIP 444. So I know you're probably already pulling out your hair. Dave, what is that? Well, I'm going to get into it. I didn't think it was going anywhere. And then yesterday, I was listening to GymRatCrypto while I was driving around and, had some errands to run. And I had him, his live stream playing in the vehicle. And he was doing reactions to an interview with Vitalik that was on another channel. I'll put a link to the video below. I'll also put a link to GymRatCrypto's channel. If you want to be on the bleeding edge of things in the Hex community or in crypto in general, you want to follow his channel. I'm not saying you do everything the guy says to do, but honestly, I kind of like his style and the way he's not afraid to learn and just kind of push into things. So that's enough of an advert for him there. But anyways, in this video, Vitalik was talking about, the roadmaps and where ETH's going, and GymRatCrypto was commenting about, all the work that's going on in ETH and all this sort of stuff. And then there was a little sentence that got mentioned that Vitalik just kind of slid in there, one sentence that, to everybody listening, didn't mean anything. I'm going to play that right now, where Vitalik talks about the roadmap.
The Purge is so history expiry EIP 4444, making some good progress. Banning self-destruct, I think at some point we just have to pull the trigger and say we're going to do it.
So what Vitalik was talking about there is the Purge phase that's eventually upcoming on the roadmap. And now, I always figured there would be some future where there's some kind of blockchain pruning, maybe coins that haven't been touched or some bits of code that nobody's used in a decade end up, being dropped to a side chain somewhere because it doesn't affect the system state or the balance of anything that's going on. A lot of the scam projects that nobody falls for, stuff like that. I always pictured it being something like that, but never gave it too much thought. But Vitalik pretty much publicly said his support for EIP 444. You might think, well, what does that mean if Vitalik supports it? So what? Well, let's go back 2 years where Lex Fridman was interviewing Vitalik and kind of asks Vitalik what kind of leader is he in Ethereum? Like, is he the dictator of Ethereum? Does he just speak and, Ethereum does what he wants. And, he kind of says no. He's more of the high priest. So let's watch this clip.
I don't know if there's something interesting to say about that kind of structure and thinking about the future of cryptocurrency. Does there need to be a leader?
There's different kinds of leaders. There's dictators who control all the money. There's people who control organizations. There's kind of high priests that just have themselves and their Twitter followers.
What kind of leader are you, would you say?
Yeah, in these days, actually, a bit more in the high priest direction than before.
Yeah.
Like, I definitely actually don't do all that much of kind of going around and like ordering Ethereum Foundation people to do things because I think those things are important. If there's something that I do think is important, I do just usually kind of say it publicly or just kind of say it to people, and quite often projects just kind of start doing it.
Vitalik straight up says what he does as high priest, he pretty much gives his blessing, like the Pope and his holy water, puts his weight behind it by talking about the improvement publicly, which he just did in that video. He publicly stated his support for EIP 444. And to me, this is big news because, as he says, this is the way he quietly supports a change in Ethereum. He lets it be known to be public first so that other people can go ahead and discuss and work on it. Now, moving into the meat of the matter, what is it? Well, currently it's in a draft state. So here it is on the website, and I'll have a little picture here. It's only in draft form on the Ethereum Magicians website, or whatever the OGs there call themselves. And as we could see, there's a George can't pronounce it, George K, Light Client, and Alex Stokes that are behind the improvement protocol. Now, doing a little bit of a dive, I'm familiar with GitHub and know how to use it. So I look at other people's accounts on there and that sort of thing. And George K, he's big into Tor and develops all kinds of stuff. And, didn't really look into Light Client at all. But Alex Stokes, who's the one that piqued my interest, because when you try to research this Ethereum improvement protocol, you find him all over it. He's the public face of it. So if there's a video or an interview or something, you see Alex Stokes talking, presenting, fleshing out the ideas, working at it. He's the public face of this. So this is why I'm going to focus on him. Now, pretty much the way he looks at the problem is, syncing an Ethereum node sucks. I don't know if any of you have ever done it. Years ago when ETH first came out, like I'm talking right fresh, I ran a node for a little while. I mined 2 ETH back when it was CPU mineable. I made the mistake of dumping it on Bittrex for a few dollars. I wish I had held on to it. But at the time, I wasn't very impressed with Ethereum. And, it was just... There were so much more interesting things going on at the time, so I wasn't in tune enough for it to catch my attention. The reason why I had installed the node is I love Commodore VIC-20s, and back then the narrative of this is going to be a world internet computer, and we're going to be able to write simple Dapps on there, simple software. It harkened me back to 10-year-old Dave sitting in front of the Commodore writing code, and I thought, well, I could write code on a Commodore. So maybe on the first version of an internet computer, I might be able to write code on that too and develop something or do something. And so that's why I had installed it back then. Mined it a little bit. Solidity was too complicated for me. So, deleted it. Sold my 2 ETH for, I think it was less than $4. And moved on with my life. And so... in 2017, I tried syncing an Ethereum node again. I bought a new computer, and back then there was the ICO craze, and I used to have a policy of I only invested in coins where I could run my own node. So like, you know, I would have no problem with Doge because I could run and sync a Doge wallet. I used to have Redcoin. I could mine or, you know, stake and sync a Redcoin node, and same thing. This was my way in those days of preventing scams, because there used to be so many blockchains out there that were just databases, and there you couldn't sync, you couldn't connect. You'd see these projects with awesome graphics and all these cool things going on, and then you'd actually try downloading the software, and all of it was just broken garbage like IOTA. And we all know the famous Richard Hart talking about IOTA. And so this was my screening process. And when I saw these ICOs on Ethereum, I thought, you know what, time to fire up the Ethereum node again. And guess what? I couldn't do it. I couldn't sync the last 200 blocks ever. My computer just wasn't quick enough. And because of that, I stayed out of all the ICO scams back at that time, because I was like, things should have its own blockchain that you can sync yourself and look at the code and do all these things. And so luckily I missed, you know, well, sadly I missed the ICO bull run. I missed all the awesome stuff going on in Ethereum, but I was also 100% protected from all of the losses. So, you know, no problems then. So as it stands today, you want to have an Ethereum node on your computer, you need to have like 500 gigs of disk space. This is huge. I mean, it's just a lot of space, and it's not just that, it's the computing power. Your node has to redo every calculation from Genesis block, you know, till now. And let me warn those of you who ever want to try to do this, when the ETC Classic fork happened, it wasn't a true clean fork like the last ones that just happened. They actually rewrote history, so the blocks continued. And then on the Ethereum chain, they rolled them back. And man, your computer crunches away like crazy, rolling that chain back. You just watch it like grinding away at stuff. And it's like, oh man, like this sucks. And it like pretty much your syncing stalls there. And then it slowly continues. It's, you know, it's just the worst. So a lot of people don't like this. A lot of people run nodes for various reasons. So it used to be that miners ran nodes, and you would run a node when mining to have a connection and to do your mining. And then whenever you found a block, you would get paid in ETH. I mean, you know, you get your nice block reward. There's on Ethereum, every second of every day, there's, you know, well, not every second, every 10 seconds, there's thousands of dollars just being given away to people holding nodes who are mining. And then really back then it was, who cares if they have to buy an extra hard drive to save the data? Look at all the profits they're raking in, having the client, running the node. I mean, it's just an expense. You want to make money while like store some data, right? Now with the merge, there are no more miners, but you have validators. So you run a node, you put 32 ETH in the node, you can validate, and then you get paid to have your hard drive. I still don't think this is a problem. I think this is a fine incentive system. It's almost similar to Dash and the masternode system. You know, who's going to store the chain? Well, we got these masternodes. They get paid a tiny little bit of the block emissions to store data, and then we're not going to question it. They have an incentive to do so, and then we'll always have an awesome historical record and system state. But, you know, a lot of people, like before the EIP was taken off of GitHub and moved to the magical Ethereum site there, one of the users, DY Lane Taft, said, you know, isn't part of the problem that people leave contracts consuming storage indefinitely on the blockchain. So, you know, and that's true. Think of all the coins, think of all the junk that somebody paid a miner to mine and create, and now it gets stored forever. But as long as there's new emissions coming and new transaction fees, you are getting paid to store that data, in my mind. I don't think that this is a problem. I don't think that, you know, asking somebody who's profiting off of this to fork out $100 for an extra hard drive is that makes you that hard done by in life, unfortunately, but some people do. So now we know what the problem is. The concern that the blockchain is just going to grow so big, it's going to be terabytes in size. Hypothetically, you could have Ethereum blocks up to 2 megabytes in size, which means you could have, if you raise the gas limit, terabyte or more of data being formed every year, being added to the Ethereum blockchain. So let's take a deep dive and listen to Alex Stokes speak about this problem in his own words rather than me just steel manning his argument.
The key thing it wants to do is change the guarantee that we have today, that if you run an execution client on the network, it has all of the history of the entire chain for all time. This means I could go back to the 10th block and say, what was, give me a transaction in that block. And that's great in terms of making the Ethereum node be responsible for that service, right? But as we'll see, it actually doesn't, it really doesn't scale. And that's what 4.4 is trying to drive at, is that and I'll say this later, but if you think about this, let's say, we're running the Ethereum protocol in 50 years, even 100 years, you won't care about a transaction that happened today. So why would your node want to keep track of it, right? So anyway, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Specifically what 4.4 says is that we're going to drop this guarantee. What that means is that on the peer-to-peer networking layer, no longer can you get blocks, and that includes the headers of the blocks, transactions in the blocks, and also omers, which is just this historical sort of proof of work function that's going away with the merge. But either way, they exist, are important for history. And then also receipts. So a receipt here is when you execute a transaction on Ethereum today, there's basically some side effects, and these side effects are recorded in this other data structure called a receipt. And they're important. They're important for light clients. They're committed to in the block header. And yeah, if you're a Dapp developer, you've seen logs. You've I'm sure run into logs either in Solidity or events in Solidity or logs with the protocol. These receipts are where the logs live. So they're very important in terms of using the protocol. And importantly, 4.4 does not touch the execution state. So this is a distinction that's actually quite important. There's if you think about the blockchain, there's a chain of blocks. And when we say history, we mean basically all of these really old historic blocks in the chain. Separately, you can execute, the transactions in these blocks, and they perform some mutation to the state that we'll look at a little bit more in a second. But basically, there's the Ethereum state, and that is kind of its own can of worms in terms of managing the state. And there are various ideas around state expiry.
So there, we've heard him talk about it, and he's also concerned or mentions the state of the Ethereum won't be affected by this, just the historical data. And so the state of the Ethereum network is who has what, where should everything be in everyone's wallet at any given point in time. This is very important to anybody who has a balance. And if you're an Ethereum bro, this is, something that you care about, right? And, as any token holder or NFT holder, this is something you should care about. Now, let's move on to another segment in this interview where he talks about the removal of the historical data.
And so that's what the EIP says, is we're going to change the guarantees on the peer-to-peer layer, where basically now these headers, block bodies, receipts, these historic parts of the chain that honestly are sitting on your disk, and for most users, you actually don't need them. You can just get rid of them, right? And so what that means is that if I'm a peer-to-peer node on the network and I'm syncing the chain, I would basically go to a peer, and I might need something, let's say I asked for something from 2 years ago, if the cutoff period is 1 year, they wouldn't give it to me. And again, that's changing the guarantee. But anyway, so the EIP says, yeah, we'll do this. We need some cutoff period. Right now it says a year. I think that's actually about a good value, but obviously, we could debate that, the specific value. But anyway, the point is that if you have this, then that implies that your node doesn't need to keep the chain history. for example, because it doesn't have to provide it to your peers. And so because of that, you can just delete it. And suddenly, like I said, this red box here could just be gone. So a huge savings right out of the box. Importantly, if you don't have this information, it also means you can't give it to users. And that's like probably the bigger sticky point, I think, with the EIP so far, is that a lot of people rely, like I said, there's events in Solidity. These are implemented as logs within Ethereum and the protocol. And people use them. Like if there's a transfer into like a Gnosis multisig, like there's a log that's fired. And so the issue is like, okay, what if you need to like audit that multisig? Maybe you want to audit like funds flowing through it. And suddenly you like can't look 13 months ago because 12 months have passed and that's the history cutoff. Like that is not great necessarily.
This could suck for some Dapps, some decentralized applications. And then he kind of laughs like Goofy. Yuck. Shit out of luck. So if you're a Gnosis safe and you're locking things into it, kind of like Staker Dapp or whatever, those other programs that use the Gnosis safe, a lot of things to do with XDAI and stuff like this and locking. You leave things locked in your safe too long, I guess it's gone. You're a Hexican. Hey, let's check on that stake from 3 years ago. Time to mint. It's deleted. All gone. So, to me, this is garbage. Like, I do not like this method of pruning. I do not like this solution at all. And so he acknowledges the problem. He says, well, this sucks for certain Dapps, and he mentions the Gnosis safe, which is, something he's aware of. It doesn't suck if you're just an ETH dude or you're just trading ERC20s. If you're turning Ethereum instead of a computer to a exchange, well, if it's just going to be a big decentralized exchange in the future, well, then, you don't care. Who gives a shit what people traded long time ago and what things they did. And, so that's his thing. And I mean, in watching these interviews with Alex, and, the guy's smarter than me. He's working on a legitimate problem, so I don't want to poke at him too much. But, like, man, when people, like, in a lot of his interviews, when you say serious things that suck and you start laughing like Goofy, I'm telling you, like, my heart sinks, hey? Would you let Goof Troop anywhere near your system and, maybe set up your Trezor for you or do something like that? It's just too much for me. And sorry, man, I'm not trying to poke fun of you, and some people have nervous laughs, and I get that. I just did it too. But, hey, whatever. So let's move on to further in the video where Pooja Rajan, I believe I'm pronouncing her name correct. She's the interviewer in this video. And she asks about different things using the, like how often is the historical data used in apps and stuff like that. So let's listen to his response.
All right. So we did talk about historical data, right? You did mention about how we can verify the data and who will provide it. So I want to go a little bit deep in it. So how important do you think this historical data is for normal people running nodes? Like how common it is to refer back to these data?
Sorry, repeat the question. How common it is for people to use this whole data?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like how often do we use it?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's a great question. It's a little bit hard to say without like doing some sort of like, user survey, which perhaps we should do. I would hope to like speak again to like, it brought like a wider variety of sort of stakeholder types during this ETH Magicians Council. Because again, so far we've mainly gotten feedback from core devs, and obviously, we should get many more people involved. Point is, I would want to ask them and say, okay, like, yeah, like, I gave sort of an example of like auditing a Gnosis multisig. Like, is this something you do? Like, is this something you'd want to do? Like, do you think that would be an issue for your Dapp, your application? If, you didn't have this guarantee, how would that look? I don't like, again, just like off the top of my head, it's like, you know, like how often have you gone back like 3 years to like find a transaction in some block? Like you haven't, I haven't, like no one on this call has, no one listening to this call has. Like, I think there are definitely like archival services and like you can go get that information. Like there are people who index the chain and they have it. It's certainly important, right? It needs to be available, but like it shouldn't necessarily be a burden on every user. And this is what 4force is trying to get at, is that you should be able to run a full node without needing to like keep all of this history.
As you know, from his point of view, nobody who watched that clip, nobody's ever using historical data from a year or 2 or 3 years ago. Well, you know what? Us Quattro Cinco people do want to use it. Those of us who were there on day 1 of Hex and made stakes still have stakes and want to retrieve this historical data. And again, nobody watching uses it. Well, dude, so wrong. At the bottom of that video, I'm going to leave a comment. I'm going to leave a link to that video. And if you watching this video somehow decide that you want access to historical data, please like my comment or leave one of your own on that video. Anyways, he does give certain solutions and different methods and different ways that the blockchain data could be stored. And, like different ways that Dapps could load data from disk, so to speak. Pooja Ramjan asks, what Dapps and stuff will be affected.
What kind of project will be affected by these changes?
Yeah, so honestly, that's probably the biggest, I think, or the most contentious point of the EIP is that there is this breaking change. So we can sit here and be like, oh, you get all these savings in terms of the disk footprint you need, less bandwidth to move blocks around, less compute to verify the blocks, because you get rid of all this history, and that's great. But what that means is that now, as a Dapp developer, a user of this JSON RPC endpoint, you could ask for some history and your node just might not have it. And so the question then is okay, what do I do? The easy answer is you say, okay, yeah, this node doesn't provide this anymore. You go to some other service like Infura. And again, that gets to questions of centralization, and that's not an ideal answer. Again, Portal Network would be a great solution here.
So as you can see, he admits to this being contentious. And with that being said, using Infura or, this portal network that they're trying to set up, to me, isn't a solution. Part of the reason it's not a solution is, for example, for me as a Hexican, my code is permanent. We can't go back and change the code on the Ethereum network. So if the old calls to retrieve data from disk are just going to return some kind of error or say the data doesn't exist or isn't available, we can't go back in there and ask it to call another network or call something else to find this historical data someplace else. We can't change it. There's no admin keys to the contract. And so this is not a solution for our use case. Now, with that being said, pruning the data on Ethereum to only 1 year isn't the limit of what they want to do. In another video that I watched, the breakout meeting number 15 about EIP 444, we'll call it Quattro 4. Now, or the Quattro. They talk about, this is the meeting of Ethereum developers. They talk about perhaps even having less than a year of data on chain. So let's take a listen to this.
If we make a decision on this time period, how difficult is it going to be to tune that over time? Is this sort of a decision where we're going to say, here is the period in which you can we're going to guarantee the clients will maintain that data, and then in 6 months or 1 year or something, some time period we change that? Is that going to be a really difficult thing to do? because I'm like a little bit worried about starting out with a lot smaller, like 3 months, because now that's definitely a different guarantee than some people might be used to, since we're moving into this new world where you expect to have all historical data, and now you don't have as much of it. And going from all to 3 months is a little bit bigger of a jump than like all over 1 year.
By that, you have the assumption that there are use cases that use historical data from 3 months to a year, that there are more of those use cases than use cases that use historical data from the entire history, basically. Like recent history is more important than less recent history, right?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think more recent is more important, and it's not clear to me where it starts becoming like exponentially less important, if it ever does. But I would guess that there are still a fair number of people using things between that 3 and 12-month period, and the less people we can upset with this change, the better. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, is this a decision that we're about to make that's going to be very difficult to change and tune? Or is this something that is okay to tune?
I think it's okay to tune, but also in terms of like de-risking this, because it is such a huge change, it makes sense to say, yeah, start with something very big where you almost kind of don't notice it. And then once we have it working and we have all these other methods and people feel comfortable like going to torrent networks to get the history, let's say, things like this, then we can say, okay, let's ratchet it down to like 6 months. And eventually there's going to be, there's going to be some upper bound on like the consensus needs this much history to do anything. So like, it's going to be a certain amount of time, but we can probably go smaller than a year.
So now that we can see that they're aware that this might be contentious and they're concerned, how can we introduce this in a way in which most of Ethereum users aren't going to object? They're going to say, oh, it doesn't affect me. This is pruning data long back. And, unless you're in something like Gnosis Safe or Hex or say like Wise protocol, or if you're trying to develop some kind of future bond implementation, like a savings bond or a municipal or future corporate bond on top of Ethereum as your layer one, like this kind of thing would not affect somebody who's day trading on Ethereum using Uniswap. So they discuss like, well, maybe we'd make it a year, and then we're going to, as he says, ratchet down to 6 months and then maybe 3. If you just want to ratchet it down, I got one better for you. Why don't you just throw the disk drive out of your Ethereum virtual machine, your internet computer, and have no disk storage if you're so concerned about storing any data? Why don't you just be the next IOTA then and just focus on being your consensus network, and we're just going to keep a thing of live nodes and have a live consensus without any history and see how awesome that works. Because it doesn't work. It sucks. The blockchain, the chain of blocks, is what makes the blockchain valuable long term. That's why IOTA is buggy. That's why something like Hashgraph isn't super exciting. It's, yeah, great. You have a consensus network, but I mean, you need fail-safes. You need that history, and I believe you need it there permanently. And you know what? I'm not alone in these opinions. So like, I've already gone through the internet a little bit, and so let's throw up a screenshot here of a user on the Magical Ethereum site there, user Annette, who, makes some points out the need to protect the older uses of the blockchain. She points out, NFTs prior to the E721 standard, like the original CryptoPunks, aren't in a normal token state. So their data would be lost if you clipped out anything older than a year. Those people would lose those NFTs and they would just be gone. But that's where, I'm going to get into this closer to the end of the video. They're not gone because they're copied onto ETH proof of work, the Ethereum Fair and the Ethw chains. But we'll get more into that later. This is just trying to think of it from a dev perspective against this EIP. So then let's take a look at another screenshot from a user NiceBlue. So this person describes himself as an Ethereum fan and a Dapp developer for many years. And they find this EIP 444 deeply troubling, is their exact words. And I'm going to quote here, "For those who say ETH was never meant to store data permanently, that's simply not true. It was, exclamation. It's spec'd that way, and therefore it was used that way. And it was used that way by us Hexicans, by Gnosis Safe, by those wise guys over there who invested in that crap token." You know, like, it's, you know, the NiceBlue points out this is a fundamental change to Ethereum's value proposition, and I'm surprised nobody else is really talking about it. So, you know, how do some of the proponents of this EIP feel about it? Well, they just kind of say flipping things like, here's the screenshot, Arweave fixes your problems, period. So like, hey, you know, you want to store data for a long period of time? Well, here's this project over there that lets you store data hypothetically for hundreds of years. Well, that's great. But again, as I had mentioned earlier, what if your code's already written? What if you're trying to protect something that's already there? You know, like, yes, if you want to build something new, you could tie it to Arweave and hopefully this third party still exists. So we got taken this information and this contentious point, different ways to play this whole thing. So number one, my biggest play from a perspective of protecting my bags is, you know, I'm going to be deep into Pulsechain. So we still have time because this EIP 444 is, you know, probably a year or two out from being in fruition. By then, hopefully 4 weeks later, as the SpongeBob thing says, Pulsechain will be out, and then our hex bags will be on that chain, and then whatever, if ETH goes up into fiery flames and becomes the next IOTA, just focused on being a currency for some reason and a trading platform and a, you know, shitcoin casino, well then whatever, we'll be on Pulsechain. We'll be able to run Dapps that have long intended uses, things that can load from disk with cheap fees and store data, the things that a computer was meant to do. One thing that I was excited about is that there is the proof of work continuation, because if the proof of stake version goes to this and there are projects that are affected, some of these things that are on the ETH proof of work chain will retain their value. So your early crypto punks, they will still work on the ETH proof of work chains. Hex, with its long-term staking that requires a breadth of historical data, are still going to function on the ETH proof of work chains. They may no longer function on the ETH POS chains. So this is good that a lot of Hexicans were out there, early supporters of these chains, because we don't want them to do this blockchain pruning on there. We want them to hang out and kind of like be our plan B to the prom in case something goes wrong. You want that kind of option out there. And I feel as a Hexican, we should be doing stuff to, you know, educate ourselves and think about these things and have backup plans, because personally, I have generated a lot of wealth from Hex, and I don't want to see that evaporating because some goofy programmer decides that he's going to tinker with the code and delete my long-term stored value. I don't like that. Now that we know that this EIP is going forward, and those are my plays in terms of backing up my current data, what is some ways that we can cash in on what's going on in the Ethereum chain? Well, one of them is the graph. So its symbol is GRT, trades at 10 cents. It was created in 2018. It raised $12 million back then. And then on December 17th, 2020, the graph created its own chain. So let's show a screenshot. Using subgraphs like an API, users of Ethereum can build on top of it and pull data, from this kind of subgraph sidechain. Now, the graph token also burns 1%. And, you might be saying, well, Dave, why are you talking about this graph when there's this native Ethereum thing going on? Well, so turns out the graph and Ethereum have some pretty strong ties. So let's screenshot here to Eva Beylin, who's director of the Graph Foundation. Well, it turns out she also worked heavily with the Ethereum Foundation. And there's a video that only has 105 views, and 5 of them are me, where they talk about EIP44 and the graph, and how they're a DAO and decentralized, and they are convinced that they have a fighting chance of being the long-term historical data solution for Ethereum. So let's take a look at what they have to say for themselves.
So what does that have to do with the graph? Once Ethereum clients no longer store historical date that's older than 1 year, they will also be unable to serve queries for that state. And prominent voices, excuse me, in the Ethereum community, including Vitalik himself, have publicly endorsed the graph as a replacement for the JSON RPC API in Ethereum to query this historical data. In fact, the graph is mentioned even in the text of EIP44's proposal for this purpose.
So they feel like they're a shoo-in to do this. Now, again, this isn't an answer for the Quattro Cinco stakes with Hexicans, because doing this would require your Dapp to probably pay more fees. You'd probably have to burn some kind of graph token to access the data, and there's no way to shoehorn this into the existing code. But for newer apps being built in the future, this is something they might use. Now, one of the drawbacks to the graph here is, let's take a look here from a screenshot what user YTREZQ has to say. And they point out that the graph jumped on the censoring of tornado.cash. So, you want this third party to hold the Ethereum blockchain historical data, and then they're out there censoring anything to do with tornado.cash. So I think that sucks. But if they get it, they, their token may have some value if you wanted to play it that way. So I'm not saying to invest anything in it, but I'm just saying if the time comes, they might gain from this. So let's take a look at what this user had to say. For their use, he says, quote, "We also need very old data in order to let user withdraw funds from several years ago," end quote. If third parties are required, Ethereum will be decentralized at a currency level, but not at a Dapp level, and will be fully permissioned by third parties. So what they're commenting here is, if you go this route and use the graph, Ethereum will have a totally decentralized currency that runs on POS, and the ETH token will be decentralized, and the validators, and you can hold it and transfer that. But any Dapp that actually does Dapp things other than just exist to be traded and needs to store data to disk for some reason is going to have to run through a permissioned third party like the graph, who we know will censor people. So, to me, that's a big negative. But again, heads up, if a year or two from now, it looks like this is going to go through, keep an eye. This might be a token you might want to do some research on. So another way to profit from this is Arweave. So pretty much, they currently store blockchains. It's one of the things they do. They have full chains of Solana, AVAX, Cosmos, Moon River, and many more. And, they store things and keep it, and they have it as, you can access this data. Again, I'm pretty sure they have a token as well. You can look it up. And so if Ethereum's going to go with either of these things, another thing the devs were talking about a lot in their chats was Porthole. I don't know if it has a token or if it's just a project. I haven't bothered to look into it yet. So if this is a move that's going to happen and us Hexicans are over here and you still got some ETH playing around, this might be in a way 2 years from now, one of these three players is probably going to do very well if this is the route Vitalik continues to push the project. Now, going back to what I was saying before about the forks, I, as a Hexican, am happy that there's forks and there's backup copies of the old Ethereum system state. I mean, a lot of the projects on there are broken and clunky, but you know what? If somebody wants to build Noah's Arks all over the place and have copies of my hex in them, I'm happy for that. I was out there trying to tell people about this before the forks. You know, I was watching, Discourse Syndicate this morning, and they were kind of like joking about it and like, oh, well, nobody saw this coming. It's like, I was posting shorts about it, but only 68 people watched, hey? You know, like, I saw this coming weeks away and months away. Like, I was aware. I don't produce a lot of hex content. I'm not out here trying to have a YouTube channel. I just post random garbage on my YouTube channel. I'm not out here begging for subscriptions and all this kind of stuff. But once in a while, when I feel something big is happening, I'll come out and say it. And, you know, I'm glad if people can take the information and find it of use. You know, Crypto Coffees finally came out this morning with a big bright-eyed thumbnail talking about how awesome, you know, these forks are now and stuff like that. And it's like, ooh, late to the party, but I guess better late than never. And, you know, earlier when the forks happened and I was out there buying hex, I was on Twitter, you know, telling people about the good deals of hex on these backup chains, or as I called it in my tweet, an insurance chain, which is truer now than ever that we know about EIP 444. And, you know, like, guys, you can't be asleep at the wheel here. We all got stuff to do. I'm not a full-time hex content creator because I got rental properties to look after. I'm out there chopping trees down all over the place and just busy with things that make me money in real life and responsibilities. And, you know, I got a 3-year-old and we got to go to the park and other things to do. But even then, I still find a little bit of time to do some research. And if you don't have time to do some research, follow people who do. So, you know, I'll give you an example myself. I post periodically about weird things. I talked on an interview with Ballet Brand long time ago about my concerns with the scaling and Ethereum, and, you know, long before there was even a thought of Pulsechain, he asked me if this was something I was concerned about. I said yes, and, you know, he found that interesting because back then it wasn't a problem. I was thinking ahead already. I was talking about, you know, the way the OA could sell hex by providing giant liquidity pools to help with scaling off chain or to another chain long before Pulsechain existed. Just, you know, there are people out there who are thinking about these things. I'm not the best person to follow with this kind of stuff because I just got a busy life. But earlier in the video, I'd shared somebody that I was personally impressed with. So, you know, I'm an OG Hexican here. And I've been personally impressed with GymRatCrypto and his buddy there. And they just knock it out of the park. And, you know, I wouldn't necessarily do all the things they're doing. Like they straight up say, you know, that, hey, like I'm borrowing money and doing this or doing that or doing things on leverage. And, you know, they straight out say, you know, this probably ain't for you, but they're doing the research. They're asking tough questions. They were talking to the developers there from Ethereum. I would like to see an EIP protocol that protects historical data, that doesn't break existing smart contracts. I believe there are ways to do that and that they should be looked into a little bit more. And if you're at the cutting edge of something technological, like right at the edge, you're going to find the people who do that sort of thing, they don't ever claim to know the answers, or, you know, they don't boast piles about stuff. They just kind of, you know, tend to be a little more modest and ask a lot of questions and try to find facts and, you know, try to share what they know. And so I encourage people to, you know, continue following all your favorite Hexicans. You know, I'll always follow Hexo and, you know, Coffee Crypto and Hodl Dog and all these guys, even if they're not talking about the cutting edge stuff. But, you know, I'm always personally too want to make sure that we're aware of what's going on, that our community is ready, and that we're out there and that we can comment and say, you know what, we don't like this change, we want this or that. So, you know, I don't know that this would be catastrophic as long as Pulsechain is launched and we can just take our economic energy off the Ethereum chain and go to Pulsechain and do things over there and invite people who want to build long-term apps there, or we can hang out on the Ethereum POW networks. But I would like it if a better solution was found, one where, you know, if you asked for a get hash command, that it just wouldn't return an error after this sort of thing passes. Anyways, I've rambled on long enough. This video's probably gone on too long, and I've probably restated my points too often. For that, I apologize. But I thank you for making it to the end of the video.